So, in America, President Trump supporters have a phrase: trust the plan, but always chimp. And what it means is that they recognise that President Trump is the only guy, that he has the mandate of heaven, the right to rule, and that he is on their side. However, whenever someone in the administration feels the need to concede to the enemy, whenever they make a bad call or lean on liberal instincts, then they will take to social media and make their voices heard. That they will, much like a mule, give them a carrot when it does something that they like, and smack them with a metaphorical stick, speech on social media, when it does something that they don't like. Trust the plan, always chimp. And I must say now, as a member of the very online right that has been disparaged for being perceived to not trust the plan with reform enough, I must say that we are vindicated in pushing reform along, because now reform have committed to what amounts to remigration. They have decided to scrap indefinite leave to remain, which, to those outside the UK, and to Boris Johnson, who didn't know it existed when he took power in 2019, this may be a foreign concept to you, but what happens is if you're in the UK for 5 years or longer, then you get the automatic right to be in the UK forever. And you get access to social housing, so taxpayer-funded housing. You get access to benefits, welfare. You get access to the NHS, free at the point of use. Not that, obviously, when people go and access the NHS does a great job on following up and charging migrants for payments that they're meant to make anyway. And also you get an expedited citizenship claimant process for any of your descendants and yourself. And so this massive trough of benefits is given out to literally anyone just by being in the country for an extended period of time. So it gives immigrants the incentive to game the system and just cling on for dear life, applying for different visas and milling about in the system until such a time that they can have the full suite of benefits afforded to British people. And this was highlighted originally by Sam Bidwell, who used to work at the Adam Smith Institute, who wrote out a oven-ready plan for the Home Secretary with a stroke of a Whitehall pen to extend indefinite leave to remain years from 5 to 15 years, to restrict it to a number of compatible countries like Western Europe, the Anglosphere, so Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and America. Would prefer heritage Australians, Canadians, and Americans, but it's hard to make that distinction in law, and to Asian tiger economies, so specifically South Korea and Japan. So economically productive, polite, culturally compatible countries. Kemi Badenoch went to adopt this and she cut it only to a 5-year extension, so you have to be here for 10 years. She didn't restrict it to certain countries because she said that would be racist, and she said that you don't get ILR if you've ever committed a crime or claimed benefits. So good start. Reform UK, under sustained pressure from their base, carrot and stick, chimping, but trusting the plan, have said that they're going to scrap ILR, including for people that are already here. So the entire Boriswave will go. And they have used the term Boriswave repeatedly. And that is important because it shows that they are not just monitoring what the online right and discourse says, but they are receptive to the moral claims being made by members of their base, their supporters who want them to live up to their mandate, who they have previously disparaged as the very online right, but who generate these memes in the first place. So Farage announced this at a press conference with Zia Youssef, and they point out that hundreds of thousands of migrants who came to the UK since 2021, that's 4 million in 4 years, thanks to Boris Johnson, will soon qualify for permanent residence after the Conservative government's post-Brexit immigration system prompted a surge in arrivals. Basically, Boris opened the floodgates because he wanted the Financial Times to like him again. Direct quote, as often repeated by his advisor, Dominic Cummings. Reform has pledged to scrap indefinite leave to remain entirely, so not extending it, scrap the entire project, which is absolutely the thing to do. So what they're going to have to do is, when they get in on day one, they're just going to have to bin it off. Probably as part of a great repeal or restoration bill, whatever they decide to call it. So rather than just tinkering around the edges, they've committed to a proper revolutionary overhaul of the immigration system. They've said they're going to replace it with a renewable 5-year visa for those who meet certain criteria, designed to bring Britain into line with other countries such as the United Arab Emirates. Now, I object to this just because I do not want to be an economic zone. And so the consideration should not just be earning threshold and speaking English. It should be restricted to culturally compatible countries. And at the moment, I think that they perceive the conversation is not there yet. They just have to do merit-based, not colourblind, but culture-blind policies so that they can achieve the same aim as restricting it to, the best of East Asia, Western Europe, and the Anglosphere without explicitly saying Pakistan is incompatible with being British. I think we're going to get there. So trust the plan, but we will be chimping until we get there. That's totally fine. Under the plans, there's going to be a far higher salary threshold. The current salary threshold for skilled workers is £41,700. It was originally set about £25,000, which is basically minimum wage, by Priti Patel, who described the 250,000 Indian immigrants that she brought in every year, by the way, as living bridges, which is Prime Minister Modi's term for the diasporas that India has dispersed around the globe to then leverage as demographic and thereby democratic advantage in those countries to India's advantage. That was the proper flaw, which is why we got loads of low-wage migration. That's why the average wage for Indian migrants actually fell, and for Nigerian migrants, to below that of the average wage of Brits. So we're literally importing the lowest possible caste-dependent Indians. Brilliant plan. GDP rocket fuel being sourced from the subcontinent there. It got raised to about £38,000 a couple of years ago. But then, if you adjusted for inflation from before the pandemic, before lockdowns, to after, then £38,000 is about equivalent to a £25,000 salary. That's how bad inflation was. So the immigration threshold for a skilled worker visa was basically constant. And that's why between 60 and 70% of all skilled workers, so 2/3 of all skilled worker visas every year, were given to people who made less than the median British salary, which meant that they weren't net taxpayers, which meant that skilled workers were not net taxpayers. So that meant that because 15% of visas were given to people who were primary applicants who came principally to work, and 2/3 of those were not paying tax, more tax than they took out, that means that only 1/3 of all the skilled workers, so 1/3 of 15% is 5, were paying tax, which means that only 5%, possibly, optimistically, were net taxpayers. So that means that 5% of the visas every single year that we've given out since 2020, under the new immigration system, when it came properly into force in 2021, only 5% of those every year have been paying tax. So 5% of 1.2 million people let in every year have been paying tax. So actually, Britain's immigration system has just been human quantitative easing to soak up all of the extra money printed during lockdown that caused inflation. This is a term that Tom Jones has used before. I believe he invented it. And the rest of it is just fudging the GDP numbers by growing the gross part of the population so that there are more economic transactions that change hands. And even though GDP per capita has fallen, so we're all getting poorer per head, it looks like the economy is growing because there's just more raw activity on the balance sheet, which then the government can take to international banks and say, hey, look, our GDP is growing in line with projections. Can we have more money, please, to meet our pension and NHS commitments? And so they just grow the debt and mortgage off the futures of our children so they can redistribute more money to foreigners who are living in weird welfare battery farms. So we're paying money to the people that hate us. So the increasing number of productive people in this country, predominantly, disproportionately, native white Brits, their income is shrinking to be sold off to Somalians living in SW1 social housing. Like the prime housing crop in Westminster is being given to people that just stepped off a plane straight from Mogadishu. And they are wondering why Reform is surging in the polls, especially when they're promising policies like this. So Reform are promising to actually raise this to £60,000, although they're going to set the precise threshold after the election because they can't calculate how much money it will need to be because they don't know how much money the Rachel Reeves will do to the economy in the budget that's coming in a few weeks, and then whoever inevitably takes over from Lord Farquhar herself when she is ousted and scapegoated for the entire government's poor performance, of which she is also a part. Also, the visas will be contingent on not having access to benefits or other public funds, and there'll be stricter rules around requiring migrants to demonstrate good character, whatever that means. I assume that's being kept deliberately nebulous enough to introduce cultural requirements in the future. In which case, again, carrots. All carrots here. Have all the carrots you like, guys. The stick is in my pocket for today. I am a critical friend of Reform, having voted for them at the last election and spoken at their conference last year, not the most recent one. Trust me, when I say this, I want nothing but the best for them, considering they're going to win the election. And they are the leading party of the ostensible right wing in Britain. And if they're doing things like this, brilliant. You deserve all the praise you can get. Very good. And the restrictions include ruling out people who commit financial misconduct, tax evasion, and other criminal convictions. Applicants also need a near native level of English. It's very good. I would say native, but I'd be interested to see what kind of levels and tests they're going to apply for that. I think they're going to need to have the qualifications be met by a testing body that is administered from Britain itself and done digitally rather than accept qualifications from overseas, because as we know from the recent crackdown on H-1B visas in America and just from medical malpractice in the UK, from places like Nigeria and India. Foreign qualifications are not equivalent to British qualifications, not just in quality, but in terms of trust, because in other parts of the world where their morality is more clannish, nepotistic, and less individualistic, they will lie, cheat, and steal to advantage themselves, their family, their clan, and their honour. Or at least their ethnic group in many instances. And so you need to ensure that all of the avenues to exploit for foreigners to game the system and import more of their co-ethnics are closed off. So you need to ensure that the regulatory bodies are run by British people from Britain and not just paper Brits, like proper Brits who actually believe in the project, that are true believers in what reform is trying to do, which means firing and hiring the entire civil service from scratch, which means getting rid of all of the legislation like the Equality Act and the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act that stops you from doing that. And I'm sure they have lots of this on their radar because lots of great people like David Starkey, Liz Truss, etc. have been speaking about this, singing from the same hymn sheet at the same time. And even though these people don't necessarily like each other, like Dominic Cummings and Liz Truss, they've come to the same conclusion about the same issues, which means they're converging on what the problem is. And because they're putting it out into the public sphere, where reform seem to be trawling some ideas from, given they're using the phrase Boriswave, I think it's going to be on their radar. Because at the moment, reform's main problems have been policies and personnel, and it seems that the policies are improving. Let's hope the personnel improves and they're not just taking Tory defectors like Nadine Dorries and Jake Berry, who were responsible for the Boriswave in the first place. Take some more hardliners, guys. Take some people that actually, represent your base rather than the failures of the last how many years, and things will improve. You'll gain people's faith. So, what's fascinating in here as well is towards the bottom. There's a quote from Zia Yusuf, and, I've been critical of Zia, especially considering he called the police on Rupert Lowe, something which he still needs to account for, and I don't think it's a great idea to have a Muslim leading the flagship party of the patriotic, indigenous British host majority in a Christian country, and I think that's a contradiction that needs to be resolved, and perhaps Zia Yusuf should sit down and talk with someone about that at some point. But he gave a great quote here. Again, carrots when we like things. He said, "The party's changes would lead to hundreds of thousands of people having to apply for and ultimately losing their settled status in the UK on a staggered basis to prevent disruption to businesses." Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Yusuf said, "Many of those who will lose their leave to remain are entirely dependent on the welfare state and will leave voluntarily upon losing access to benefits. Those that don't will be subject to immigration enforcement as part of our mass deportation program." Beautiful. I could have written that. And it shows that after the very online right, clear the minefield, spend a year feathering the nest for this kind of rhetoric that shows that actually there's popular support for this and votes lie to your right, not the mythical centre ground which let millions of immigrants in uninvited, despite us voting against it in every election since 1974. It turns out that you're just adopting this rhetoric and realising this is how you win. And brilliant, this is all people have ever wanted. So again, nothing but carrots. Nothing but plan trusting from me today. Now, this is also quite interesting. There's some stats and figures in here, because the main contention has been about this stat that Farage cited at the press conference from the Centre for Policy Studies paper by Carl Williams. This is Here to Stay, estimating the scale and cost of long-term migration. And the stat that Farage cited was that he was going to save over £230 billion by abolishing indefinite leave to remain. This breaks down numbers here from the Migration Observatory. It says that 430,000 non-EU citizens currently have ILR. They should all go. They've also said that there are 4.12 million EU citizens who have applied for settled status in the UK, of which 770,000 are claiming universal benefits. Every single last one of the foreign benefits claimants should be deported, whether they're EU or non-EU. Because even though EU may be more culturally proximate, depends where in the EU, of course, if they're Bulgarian or various places in Eastern Europe, which are basically failed post-Soviet states, no. But if they are non-EU, it's not just a problem of them being costly. 33% of all Pakistanis and Bangladeshis never work a day in their lives, and the overwhelming majority of people from those places, on average, from the Middle East, North and Sub-Saharan Africa, largely India now, Pakistan and Turkey, thanks to data from Denmark and the Netherlands, are never net tax contributors across their lifetime. It's not just that they aren't paying money in, though, because our nation isn't an economic zone, it's a home. So if a home is filled with strangers, and we cannot evict them, they are squatters, and if the squatters outnumber the homeowners and the government size of the squatters, the homeowners no longer own the home. So we have to be able to send these people home. Like Zia Yusuf said, it doesn't need to be necessarily punitive, but we need to say to people, if you cannot support yourselves, we are not here to support you. You have no right to be in our country if you do not contribute. if you do not contribute culturally and economically, and if you break the law to facilitate your stay after your indefinite leave to remain is repealed and you try and claim benefits, then, like any other criminal, you will be deported. So, self-deport while you still have time. This is what happened in the Trump administration as well. They turned the CBP-1 asylum application app into a self-deportation app, and the Trump administration have facilitated hundreds of thousands of deportations, but they've actually encouraged more self-deportations, which overall saves the taxpayer a lot of money. So I'm very encouraged that they're going down this route. Now, the point of contention has been over the last day or two that the numbers that were worked out by Carl Williams have since been rescinded. I'll read from the Telegraph here because it explains the point. They say the £230 billion saving was originally calculated by the Centre for Policy Studies based on estimates of 800,000 migrants being granted ILR by 2040. It has, however, since said the figure should no longer be used because of the changes in the official data underpinning it. Farage stood by his decision, quoting the figure, saying he believed the savings would be considerably larger. Quote, "It underestimates things. I suspect many more than 800,000 actually will apply for indefinite leave to remain. Plus, it's quite tough to get the figures." Farage is completely correct here, by the way. So there has been a correction or a note posted on this original report. It says, "The Office for Budget Responsibility fiscal data contained within this report is the subject of dispute, meaning the overall cost estimates should no longer be used. We will be publishing an updated estimate in due course. This does not impact on the visa data or projections for the numbers likely to gain ILR on different visa routes." So the estimate here in the summary says, "Our central projection suggests 801,000 migrants could apply for ILR. Taking into account recent changes in the migration mix and behaviour post-pandemic, it could be as high as 1.24 million. And again, that is still a conservative estimate because we are still accumulating ILR applications because people are still coming in. And if it isn't addressed in 2029, more people will then continue to claim ILR and cost money. And it says, under the assumption of 801,000 people, so the lower estimate, attaining ILR, and using the OBR's estimates for migrant earnings, the CPS central estimate is the lifetime net fiscal cost to the state of leaving ILR conditionally unchanged for the Boriswave 2021 to now would be 234 billion, equivalent to a bill of £8,200 for every UK household spread across several decades. That, by the way, is every UK household who is a net tax contributor, of course, and if that shrinks, that bill per person will increase, and that is the lower estimate. And if you're wondering where the OBR numbers are coming from, which have now been rescinded, Carl Williams has written about this in the Telegraph before. So the OBR has used modelling here to work out different categories of migration. So how much a migrant earns versus how much they take out in tax, and they've put them in different boxes. This has been the subject of scrutiny because the OBR has frequently revised their numbers because they have been gross underestimates. For example, they estimated that there would only be 200,000 to 300,000 migrants coming in every year after Boris Johnson changed the migration system, so they were wrong by a factor of 2 to 3 times. And then, in the new economic modelling, under Sunak that Starmer then picked up, they said that it was only going to be about 400,000. So again, they were wrong by a factor of at least 2. So the OBR themselves have provided the numbers here, and the numbers are probably too optimistic, even though they're totally dire. And so the CPS have based their numbers on the OBR's numbers, which are likely too rosy and aren't bad enough. And then they've taken the lowest possible estimate to be conservative, and they look bad. And the press is losing its hair saying Reform has the wrong numbers. But if anything, Reform's numbers are nowhere near as bad as the actual debt that we're getting ourselves into. So just to make the point here, the OBR assumes net migration of around 400,000 a year for the next 50 years. Okay, that's been completely wrong. It then varies the composition of those who arrive. One of the variables it tweaks is earnings, modelling 3 different types of legal migrants. The migrant in the middle is the average Briton. They have the same average earnings, pay the same amount of tax, and use the same public services. As I've said, most Indians and Nigerians, the largest groups of migrants that have come in the last 4 years since the Boriswave, are now earning on average much lower than the average Brit. So they don't fall into this category. So the majority of migrants do not fall into the median Briton category. This type of migrant, it says, represents a decent deal for the taxpayer. They arrive at age 25, so we haven't had to pay for their educational upkeep. And so, in the numbers, we're still assuming they arrive as adults, not as children. And as we know from the Danish and the Netherlands data, children repeat the economic and criminal patterns of their parents. And, of course, they're bringing over lots of dependents, who are children. So that means that we are going to be paying for their healthcare, we are going to be paying for their education, and we're going to be paying for all the extra costs associated with children, including probably childcare. So that means that these numbers, again, are far too conservative, but they're all we've got to go off of. And yet, the line of attack has been, Reform have been using faulty numbers. They're scaremongering. No. They have been underestimating, if anything. Bear in mind, continue. As such, they contribute to the economy for decades, and while they cost us money in the long run, they don't become overall net recipients until they're very old. Next is what the OBR calls high-wage migrant workers on 30% more than the UK average. Their numbers look much better. By the time they're 81, the average life expectancy, they will have paid £767,000 in net. Those are only the exceptional, like O1 visa-style Americans, people from the Anglosphere, wealthy businessmen from Western Europe, South Korea, and Japan. That's it. And they are a fraction of that 5% of net taxpayers. So they're an even smaller sliver that we don't know the amount of. But this is what is presented to us as the GDP rocket fuel awaiting us in the subcontinent. There are basically none of these people. So we don't need to open our doors to the entire third world for the potential one diamond among the ash heaps of economic impoverishment that await us. Now, the main profile is of low-wage migrant workers on 50% less than the UK average. Why are we importing any of these people? Human quantitative easing, it seems. This migrant is a net fiscal drain from the moment they enter the country. By the time they reach 81, they will have cost the taxpayer £465,000 each at least. So this is where they're getting the numbers from. They're saying that 95% of the people the Boriswave let in every single year cost the taxpayer, by the time they're aged 81, £465,000. And so if you run the numbers, you get at least £234 billion over the next few decades. That is a conservative estimate. So Reform are totally legitimate to use these numbers. And again, if anything, it understates the problem. But the most important part about this, and the reason I made the segment, is not the numbers, it's the fact they even use the term Boriswave. Reform are engaging with the online right. Just to make sure you understand how significant this is, Reform are the top party in the country according to polling. They're about to form the next government, having gone from no MPs last election to 5 MPs again after a few left and they got some more elected and defected in the form of Danny Kruger, to now using the phrases of the online right to pilfering the memeplex for their flagship vote-winning policies. So the top party in the country, the next party of government, are using memes in their titles. This is very much like the American election, right? You've now got the Zoomers running the accounts of the Department of Homeland Security, using Pokemon memes saying, illegals got to catch them all. Same vibe. Very encouraging, because it means that there is the acknowledgement that Reform exists in an ecosystem with the online right, not that their face is set against it. It means we all serve a purpose. It means we're working in tandem, pushing down different avenues, but in the same direction. Rather than being antagonistic, one creates permission or shows where the incentives lie for the other. And so we're working together as a movement. We have co-belligerents, just like the left have allowed their co-belligerents to exist to their benefit for many years. Classic revolutionary tactics. And this is working for us. And what's very interesting as well, what's even more revealing, is they're sticking with this line despite the pushback, because Boris Johnson has told Harry Cole of The Sun that he has serious anxieties about the party's stance on Russia, because Boris Johnson wants to position himself as a Churchill figure and thinks, because he's still huffing the farts of the neoconservatives in the Conservative Party, because it's the only place he can go because everyone hates him. He's saying the answers to this country's problems are going to be Conservatives' answers. This country, presumably being Ukraine, because the Conservatives have caused all the problems in the UK, and so I doubt they have the answers, especially the current crop. Robert Jenrick, Katie Lamb, Nick Timothy aside. And Reform have responded. The Boriswave was the biggest betrayal in modern political history. He's in denial about his own record and desperately out of touch, completely circumventing the foreign policy conversation that practically nobody cares about. I wish the Ukrainians luck in defending their territory. Not my war, shouldn't be my money. I care about being invaded currently, thanks to Boris Johnson's policies. They completely sidestep the Boomercon conversation and go straight on the attack and keep pressing on the Boriswave. Name and blame. It is the correct tactic, and even though they've taken heat for using the term, they have not dropped it. They're doing excellently this week. I've been commending a few people on Reform's messaging behind the scenes, and they're well aware that this came from the online right. Do you know who else is aware? The Guardian. We always love going to the page of The Guardian to taste their tears. It's the only thing edible that they put out, frankly. And they've got a place here about the Boriswave, and they say that you might have noticed the term in the past few months. It has been used repeatedly in the mainstream media to describe the increase in inward migration from outside the EU after Brexit, when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. What you may not know, what even some of those deploying it may not fully understand, is that Boriswave is not simply a pithy description of a sociological phenomenon, but a term coined and popularised among the online far right, used in an unapologetically racist terms to describe new arrivals to the UK and then rapidly laundered into the mainstream. What you have to understand is here, they are impotent. Because they are making this point, and they're calling it racist. But frankly, we don't care what you call racist. Like, you guys call milk racist. You guys have called the fact that we want to have a country racist. A couple of weeks ago, one of your writers admitted you were just calling us racists and fascists as a rhetorical tool, and now that it isn't working, you were trying to pivot to calling us wife beaters, which doesn't really work for the pink ladies doing the conga line in front of migrant hotels that just want the rapey foreigners to stop preying on their children. Like, this is all just sophistry from you guys, and we've recognized it. And so instead, we realize that we have a moral constituency over here that is not amenable to your boy who cried wolf attempts to destroy our reputations, and instead, we're going to draw from the well of goodwill and, frankly, like, thriving intellectual debate, discourse, ingenuity, whereas you can stick with your old sclerotic talking points that aren't convincing anyone that hasn't already abandoned reading The Guardian, probably because they have a frontal lobe issue, right? I'm going to scroll down here because they've done attempted anthropology on the origins of the term. Online Right says, the originators of the Boriswave concept, and many others like it, are basically the Miranda Priestleys of contemporary right-wing politics. Oh, they made a media reference. That's Soy Jack point, guys. Wow, I so love the heckin' Devil Wears Prada. Get grip. There are various overlapping designations. Once known as the alt-right in an American context, alt-right means white nationalists, thanks to the AP Style Guide, trying to retroactively smear Jack Posobiec and Mike Cernovich and Stefan Molyneux and Lauren Southern and Milo Yiannopoulos and all those people that have now been returned to X and hopefully YouTube someday. We are in the ascendant, and those people have been often vindicated, by the way. They're now saying, now sometimes called the new right, I much prefer that term. And if you want to see a clash between the new right and the old right, the establishment right, the liberal right, the people masquerading as right-wing, you can watch my debate with Michael Gove and Catherine Burbelsing over on the Spectator TV, probably tomorrow. I was told it was going to be released on Friday the 26th, so I hope they stick to their word and don't censor anything. Anyway, or, quote, the post-organizational far right, literally nobody calls it that. They're a hard group to pin down precisely, but the median member of the tribe operates somewhere between Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage, less openly hooliganistic than the first, less interested in mainstream approval than the second, and more internet literate than either. The thing that our enemies don't understand at us is that they are further to the right than Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage. They're not actually caught between them. Like, if you're describing the tactics, possibly, but they're also not interested in street protest, because even though it usefully manufactures approval for our beliefs, because it shows if you can muster 1 million people out for something affirmative in the middle of the street, then lots of people want it, which is why Farage didn't denounce Robinson and Elon Musk when he was goaded to by 2 members of the press at Danny Kruger's defection conference, because you can see, oh, it's about a quarter of my voter base, so why would I insult them all as that lot, or the alt-right again? But also, the online right understands that there's connective tissue between the online and the real life, because pretty much everyone's only one sphere removed away from someone who is terminally online. And so they're using the new tools of discourse to work out ideas in real time in humility and frivolity, but also do the serious research. And the reason they're anons is often because they're incredibly competent people, but who have far too much to lose by being doxxed and outed and making this entire enterprise their lives. Like, there's no way I can retreat from the world stage now. Like, I've put my face to things. And so I've got no option but to be in discourse with my face to it. And that's why I exist in tandem with the Anons, and I hope they understand the restrictions that we, with our faces to things, operate under. But the point being is that the Anons themselves are the intellectual wellspring from where, like it or not, the politicians and the street-level activists will draw. Like, the Anons and the members of the online right who put our faces to things often disseminate out talking points and bits of research that then downstream people like Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage will pick up from. And eventually, they will come towards opposition. Whether or not we change our position to go further right over time remains to be seen, but I think I've been remarkably consistent and open and honest, and I think people have just slowly caught up to me. For example, going on stage at Reform Conference and saying the number one thing that Farage needs to do is support mass deportations, and then, hey presto, after the protests outside the asylum hotels in Epping and then across the country, because there are so many sex offenders being housed in 4-star accommodation, given mobile phones and spending money at our expense, Nigel Farage says, this is a massive crisis, we need mass deportations. Now again, Farage had written, or at least had written for him in March when Rupert Lowe was defenestrated, that saying mass deportations was a dark and dangerous use of rhetoric. He had told Stephen Edgington, I'm not going to go down the route of mass deportations, it's not my ambition. If I talk about it, imagine the headlines, they'll be there for weeks. So the fact that he's now saying, commendably, that he supports mass deportations is excellent. Now, he has said before that he's only going to target foreign criminals and mainly the men, and they're going to allow the women and children to stay. I think that's a bad idea, especially if you deport like the father of a young boy and he's from an Islamic country, then he's going to grow up to be a jihadist radical who resents Britain for depriving him of his dad. I think, much like Tom Homan said, you're going to have to deport families together. And that's fine, because going back to these countries where they're just going to practice their faith and live out their habits, rather than recreating the third world in the first world, they can just live in the third world. That's fine. It's not a death sentence to send these people back to the countries where they live and act in aggregate looks like that country. Like, the country doesn't create the people create the country. And so the reason that India looks like India is because that's how Indians live. It's not because a bunch of Indians are living oppressed in India and you take them out of India and then you drop them in Britain, they immediately become British. No, Britain just turns into India if you import the whole of India into Britain. It's a basic concept that I shouldn't really have to explain to many people, but yet again, the blank slate truly is the last modern religion. It replaced Christianity, of course, and has been an absolute unmitigated disaster ever since. But breaking the blank slate is a very important mission that I'm sure we'll get onto. Anyway, Farage is now committed to doing mass deportations, and he said there's going to be hundreds of thousands of people every year. They're going to leave the European Convention on Human Rights and the UN Refugee Convention if necessary, and they're going to cut deals with certain countries, including Nayib Bukele's El Salvador, perhaps as a third-party detention for foreign criminals. They're going to ensure that the Taliban receive back Afghans, and people are going, oh my God, how could you send Afghans back to the Taliban? Because a bunch of the Afghans that we had shipped over, one, are Taliban fighters, two, are actual criminals and sex offenders, so we don't really care what happens to them if they're dropped back off in a nation of Muslim rapists, and they themselves are Muslim rapists, and they'll feel right at home. But three, because lots of so-called asylum seekers fleeing the Taliban have gone back to Afghanistan on holiday, just as they did in Germany. So let's give them a permanent holiday by sending them home. Great idea. And Farage has said here, in this Times piece, in this interview, the aim of this legislation is mass deportations. We have a massive crisis in Britain. It is not only posing a national security threat, but it's leading to public anger that frankly is not very far away from disorder. There is only one way to stop people coming into Britain, and that is to detain and deport them. Straight from the Trump, even Rupert Lowe playbook. And I know, by the way, that the Trump administration were not too delighted that Nigel Farage was counter-signaling mass deportations by name, considering it was the policy of the Trump administration that won Trump a plurality of Hispanic men, ironically enough. And as they're trying to carry it out, if Nigel Farage is signalling that mass deportations are a dark and dangerous use of rhetoric, then he's counter-signaling his ally and friend, President Trump. And so I know the Trump administration have been encouraging him to adopt this policy, and I'm glad to see that Nigel has been receptive to it. He actually went to fly out to NatCon DC and give a speech called Making Mass Deportations Happen, but ironically, Britain's world-class airport infrastructure caused his flight to be delayed, and so he only made it for his excellent Senate testimony, or congressional testimony, rather. He didn't make it for his speech, which is a shame, because I'd like to have heard his plans in detail. Perhaps he can give the speech another time. Anyway, so all of this reacting to and listening to and working with the online right and adopting policies that their own base wanted and that the broader public think is acceptable, deporting foreign criminals and ensuring that foreign benefit scroungers don't stay in our country indefinitely, this has upset and angered their enemies. And the most delicious of outrage reactions was Andrew Marr, Greta Thunberg's biggest fan, the man who said on Question Time, doesn't it feel like the adults are back in the room when Keir Starmer won the election? Oh, what ironic and fateful words.
Who are these people? How long have some of them been here? Are they working? Where are they working? How much tax do we get from them? It's very hard to get answers. Reform talks of low-wage workers with dependence on benefits and claims that deporting many people, and remember, we are not talking here about illegal immigrants, would save more than £200 billion in welfare payments. Other parties say this is nonsense, but presumably the welfare savings would be big. For now, I just want you to imagine hundreds of thousands of people who've been living here peaceably and quietly, working away, being arrested and forcibly expelled from this country. I want you to think about the businesses instantly shuttered, all the places where experienced people suddenly vanish, their homes emptied, the childhood friendship groups broken up, the neighbours up in arms. I want to ask, where does this end? Is it too much to say blood on the streets?
Yes, it is too much to say blood on the streets, you complete and utter head case. By the way, I responded to this when he was saying about, imagine all the businesses that would shutter, by saying first they came for the Turkish barbers and I said nothing because I did not use the cash-only foreign barber shops. And then they came for the Pakistani vape shops and I said, make sure you get all the Pakistani vape shops. And it's because these businesses that they've set up are illicit money laundering fronts that are absolute eyesores and blights on the high street. They are the boils that make up the incongruent UKYOOKAY aesthetic that nobody wanted, nobody asked for, and these absolute parasites are profiting off of the destruction of the high street by the COVID lockdowns that nobody asked for, and now providing nothing of value and basically creating redundant stores that everyone knows are total fronts for hawala finance or selling drugs. And they're just allowed to sit on our high street, making our lives worse by their very presence, and what, they just remain here forever? No, I actually don't think they do. Oh, and by the way, why do all of these foreign people on benefits have houses, Andrew? I think those houses should be emptied. I think they should be available for the working people of Britain and their children to buy and have families in. I think we should be repopulating our own country. Thank you very much, rather than battery farming indolent foreigners in it. And no, funnily enough, there's not going to be childhood friendships from the Boriswave. They came here in 2021. Like, unless you're talking about the schools, which are, many of which now are disproportionately not English, which is not a sustainable way to run a country at all. You're not transmitting your culture. You're just a kind of holding cell for foreign mercenaries and their families. No, there won't be childhood friendships broken up here. And yes, it is totally insane to say there will be blood on the streets, unless you think the migrants themselves will be rioting, as they did in Hare Hills, Leeds, and after the Southport massacres, or the Muslim militias last year, to protest their own deportation. At which point we would say, why is the GDP rocket fuel rioting about the fact that they're having benefits withdrawn? Because shouldn't they be supporting themselves? And if they're not exploiting the British people through benefits, then there's no problem taking away the benefits, right? But if they are, then why do you want a bunch of foreigners taking all my money and just buying JD Sports and smoking cigarettes and milling around about coffee shops for the rest of their lives? Like, that's not at all sustainable nor desirable. They shouldn't be here. They should be sent home. They shouldn't be stealing my money. They've done nothing to earn it. I don't know these people. They don't speak my language. They don't share my culture. I don't particularly like them. Their very presence here is making my life worse. They should go home. For some reason, Andrew Marr thinks that this is a moral outrage and that there could be blood on the streets because of this. So you have to ask yourself the question, why would we want people here who are willing to commit violence, spill blood, because we take away their benefits? Like, why do they feel so entitled to my money that they would commit violence to keep it? We shouldn't want those people in the country. They should be stripped of their ILR status and swiftly deported, or at least escorted to the nearest passport gates at Heathrow, Gatwick, Luton, Stansted, take your pick. The final and most absurd chimp out on the left, which shows that we have complete and utter victory, by the way, was by Keir Starmer. He wrote in The Sun after the Unite the Kingdom rally, "Britain is at a crossroads. Here's how we can all play our part to rebuild the country we love." Now, this wasn't pertaining to indefinite leave to remain, but it shows you that they are fighting on our battleground. They are using our language. Like, Keir Starmer saying we should change and defer ILR in his latest immigration announcement, and trying to posture as if he is conducting deportations when he's actually conducting voluntary returns, and his one-in, one-out scheme with France has actually taken more people than it has sent, so it's a total and utter failure and a complete smokescreen. The fact that he's doing that shows that he sees the momentum, the votes, the narrative power, the moral legitimacy lies on the right. And the right just means the patriotic British public, the indigenous majority, who are tired of being exploited for their hard work, their generosity, and their good nature by foreign criminals and benefit scroungers, who don't like them, who are total strangers, who are never going to be members of their family, who are never going to be their friends, who should not be here and should all be sent home. And this applies also to members of foreign communities who, yes, may have been born here, but who hate us, who hold a lasting ethnic grudge against us, who want to revolutionize our country and turn it into either a caliphate or some civil war-torn, machete-dueling African backwater, and who use their public platforms to spill Radio Rwanda-like rhetoric, genocidal rhetoric against the British public. You should not be here. You should be exiled. You should be banished. You should go and live in a country around which the people you do not hold an ethnic grudge against. But Keir Starmer said, and he's talking about the flag, he was trying to reclaim the flag, trying to posture as a patriot, much like he posed with Union Jacks on the lead up to the election. He's now trying to reclaim the England flag as just the symbol of the Lionesses, of unity, of the multiracial England football team. He says, that's the power of our flag, to make us all feel like a part of Team England. Nope, we're not a football team, we're not a sports team, we're not members to be traded to increase performance, we're not interchangeable widgets, we are not fungible economic units, we are members of a family, a broader home. The nation is an extension of our family and our home, and you cannot replace the members of our family with foreign strangers from around the world. Not going to happen, I'm afraid. And this shows how poor they are at arguing when the narrative shifts and it forces them to argue on our grounds. He says, so I know what a source of pride our flag can be and what it means to people, which makes it all the more shameful when people exploit that symbol to stoke anger and division. I know people feel angry that the country they love doesn't seem to work for them because you, your cronies, the entire Blairite order that the Conservatives played into, including Boris Johnson, broke it, and you've got no solutions. You're just going to keep kit bashing together your human rights doctrine and importing more foreign sex offenders, and then gaslighting the population to think that you're doing something about it until suddenly the blank slate arises miraculously from the midst. Not going to happen, I'm afraid. Starmer says, people who feel like they're doing everything right but it's getting nothing to show for it. Yeah, because all my money is being spent on foreign sex offenders and benefits for random Africans and Middle Easterners. No, thank you. Every single Pakistani benefit scrounger and criminal should be sent home. And the rest of them, if they want to practice Islam and marry their cousins, should not feel welcome here and should be deterred. They should leave of their own accord if they want to live out a foreign culture in my country that does not reproduce my country. But the reason I'm bringing out this article is because congenitally, reflexively, when 1 million people, up to 1 million people, turn out on the streets, they are predominantly peaceful. I think it's 8 arrests out of 1 million people. They wave the flag and they just have a good time at the Unite the Kingdom rally. Starmer feels the need to say, loutish behaviour on the streets and people made to feel like they are not welcome or safe here because of their heritage, religion, or colour of their skin. Also, religion is not the same thing as heritage and skin colour. Skin colour is immutable, religion is optional. And yeah, you shouldn't feel welcome here if you're going to practice a religion that is anathema to the Christian religion that is the established religion of this country and built this country all the way back from Alfred the Great. So Starmer here sets his face against the law-abiding, patriotic British majority, where the locus of morality so clearly lies by the fact they had this mass protest, it was jubilant, it was peaceful, and it was successful, versus the malignant mutants of the Stand Up to Racism Socialist Worker Party union-funded counter-protests that are just demonstrating for open borders to more sex offenders. Like, their policies directly lead to more child sexual abuse, as proven by the fact they were agitating outside the Bell Hotel in Epping with the assistance of the Epping police, and then lo and behold, the Ethiopian man that was charged with attempting to sexually assault a 14-year-old was then convicted. So the entire reason for the Epping protests in the first place was, hey, you're housing migrant sex offenders, and they said that's racist, and then the migrant sex offender who kicked the entire thing off is then convicted for sexually harassing a 14-year-old girl and other parties. So these people are pro more migrant sex offenders, and Keir Starmer thinks that moral legitimacy lies with them. So all of his attempts to claim the flag as a symbol of progressive patriotism fall on deaf ears. Nobody believes you. Reform is in the ascendant. They are listening to the online right. They're appropriating our policies and our terms. We exist in now a healthy relationship, a reciprocal one that I hope continues. I hope to encourage them going forward. And it shows how nervous our enemies are. The fact that Andrew Marr is basically quaking in tears on his LBC show, thinking there's going to be blood in the streets just because a few foreign benefit scroungers get sent home, means that they are worried about the momentum we have, and that means keep morale up, lads. Keep being serious, keep being dedicated, be details-oriented, encourage reform when they do something like. Encourage reform when they do something we like. Chimp out when they go astray, because clearly we're going to win this thing.